After testing all these phones, I've come to a conclusion. At the 2000 RMB price point, the realme Neo8, despite some minor flaws, is still my top recommendation. It has been nearly a year since Realme last sponsored me, but for a product this good, I have no problem hyping it up on my own dime. As usual, I won't waste time shooting B-roll for my personal reviews. I'll just get straight to the facts about the phone. Welcome to this episode, the realme Neo8 self-funded review. First, regarding the design, Realme really went all out. To be honest, being in my mid-20s, I usually don't care for flashy aesthetics, but I actually really like the Neo8. If this design were from a niche brand, I'd likely pay an extra 2,000 to 3,000 RMB in IQ tax for it. I've seen plenty of transparent style designs over the years, but at the 2000 mark, compared to competitors who haven't changed in 3 years, this back design is a total dimensionality reduction strike. It looks much better than its own flagship brother. I don't care much for the RGB lighting. When it is face down on the table, it adds some vibe when notifications come in, but it is not exactly practical. Before I roast the fatal flaws of this phone, let me stack some armor. First, this phone's build includes a metal frame, a glass back, a 1.5K display, 165Hz refresh rate, a periscope telephoto lens, and an ultrasonic fingerprint sensor. So even with some drawbacks, they are perfectly acceptable at the 2000 RMB price point. Okay, disclaimer finished. The screen on this phone is really subpar. The grainy mop effect at low brightness is very noticeable. Even when displaying solid colors in dark tones, there is a Mura grainy effect even at medium brightness. It's basically a paper-like texture on the screen. It is hard to describe. I might not be able to fully capture it on camera. If you often use your phone in low light, you'll likely find it quite noticeable, even though it is marketed with the Samsung M14 substrate. The actual display quality feels inferior to the bow panel on its big brother, the GT8. Some say it uses the same M14 substrate as the iQOO 15. But there's a clear difference in visual experience. This is mainly at low brightness levels. Actually, at medium to high brightness. Aside from a slight green tint, this screen is perfectly fine for the 2000 RMB price range. The outdoor auto brightness tuning is a bit conservative, but it is still perfectly legible. In terms of performance, Realme's performance scheduling, in my experience, tends to prioritize battery life. Plus, the 8G5 chip has a pretty poor reputation, but the actual test results really surprised me. Tested at a room temperature of 24 degrees Celsius at 300 nits brightness. This will be the standard for mid-range phone tests on my channel. First, golden spatula at 120 FPS. Settings, medium HD high quality. There were minor frame drops during scene transitions. After 30 minutes, it only locked to 90 FPS in the final few minutes. Compared to the iQOO Z11, turbo power consumption is similar, though performance dips slightly towards the end of the game. Next, frequent Shivi Silene teamfights in honor of kings. Max settings at 120 FPS. Over 2 matches, 30 mins total. It stayed stable at 120 FPS. Peace Elite now supports 165 FPS mode at 1080p with smooth graphics and anti-aliasing enabled. It stays stable at 165 FPS initially. Later, it locks to 120 FPS for about 2 minutes. I don't have the A6T with the same HE5 chip on hand, but I do have the Snapdragon 8 Elite powered OnePlus A6 running at 165Hz at 720p. The OnePlus shows slight fluctuations, but it doesn't lock the frame rate. Compared to the Neo8 at 1080p, it is a bit of a draw. Keep in mind, the A6 uses the 8 Elite. Finally, the biggest surprise was wuthering waves. Everyone calls the 8G5A trash chip, yet Realme boldly pushed the power draw to 8W. During continuous combat at max settings in wuthering waves, it achieved an average of 58 FPS. Though there are clear frame drops when using ultimate abilities, it stays mostly stable above 55 FPS otherwise. The trade-off for such high power consumption is that the peak chassis temperature hit 47 degrees Celsius. But for the mid-range target audience, students and gamers, running a bit hot is much better than having poor frame rates. So personally, I'm perfectly fine with it, since I rarely hype up a phone. When I do though, I think it is just an honest reaction. People might assume it is a sponsored video. Like when I praised Huawei's smoothness and screen quality. Some thought I'd been bought off. So, let me reiterate. I bought this retail unit myself on JD.com on launch day. These results are based on the launch day firmware, on the 12GB RAM version, with no conflict of interest involved. Now, let's talk about the cameras. Having a telephoto lens at the 2000 RMB price point is quite impressive. In the past, whenever someone asked me for a camera phone recommendation under 2000, I'd honestly be at a loss. For a mid-range phone at this price point, using a rebranded sensor from years ago as the main camera is the norm. Telephoto lenses were practically non-existent in this segment. The K90 included a telephoto lens this year, but they cut the OIs. With a native focal length of only 2.5x, not only is its zoom capability weak, but it barely even activates in low light conditions, while the Neo8's telephoto sensor is only 0.75 inches. It offers a native 3.5x zoom and OIs. At least the zoom performance is guaranteed. Even though the 7x zoom looks a bit soft during the day, it's definitely good enough. In scenes like this with slight backlighting, the edge sharpness drops off quickly, and purple fringing or chromatic aberration becomes quite obvious. But honestly, damn, getting a periscope telephoto at this price, I just have to give them credit for it. Those brands that constantly preach about value for money, their actual specs look pretty mediocre to me. Stop using rising memory costs as an excuse. They cry about memory prices to play the victim. Yet now, mid-range phones are being sold for 3,000 to 4,000 RMB. They're still trying to cosplay as iPhones. When memory prices go up, you raise your prices. But when they go down, I don't see you lowering them. As for those brands trying to shed the budget-friendly label, I guess every company has its own path. If you won't do it, someone else will. Call me a picky buyer on a budget, but that is who I am. That is why, when I see a product with actual value, I genuinely want to hype it up. If it can capture things near, far, big, or small, then it has fulfilled its mission. Because with this phone, I'd actually only used it for 2.5 days by the time I wrote the script. Regarding the power drain during gaming, you can take these descriptions into account. Do the math yourself. Today, I had dual SIM 5G on, with an hour of outdoor navigation, played 2 rounds of Golden Spatula indoors, spent the rest of the time on Wi-Fi watching videos and scrolling through WeChat. With its 8000 mAh battery, I'd say this battery life is solid. Maybe even above average. I used to think that after-sales service is a crucial factor for long-term use. We've all tried a few niche brands when we were younger. To be honest, they weren't much better than off-brands. But the older I get, the more I realize stability and ease of use are also forms of value for money. And since realme released the GT5 Pro, they haven't really put out anything that truly wowed me. They had good specs for the price, but it was hard for me to give them a wholehearted recommendation. But this realme Neo8 might be one of the phones I recommend most in the coming months. At the 2000 yuan price point, despite its minor flaws, like the subpar screen, it is already a very well-balanced choice.